Hello, and welcome to Outstanding Accounts. This is the podcast of the Commercial Law League of America. And my name is Richard Payne. I'm the president of the Commercial Law League of America, and I'm joined today by Candice Kline, who is a bankruptcy attorney and a law professor. Welcome, Candice.
Great. Thank you, Richard. Glad to be here.
So I thought we'd start off with a brief discussion of your professional background and how you ended up in bankruptcy law.
Oh, yeah. So, good question. How did I end up in bankruptcy law? So, I started my career after college as a commercial banker. So, a very traditional commercial banking position, did my MBA at the University of Chicago. Um, Pretty much focused on finance and marketing. And that was with First Chicago in Chicago. Then we had all the consolidation in commercial banking. First Chicago became First Chicago MBD, became Bank One. And at that point, I moved to New York and joined Citibank. Um, I then had an opportunity to do a .com. So this was the first .com bubble. So I joined one of my clients, a Norwegian shipping company, and we did an international shipping organization called Optimum Logistics. So that took me around the world. This was just a really fun, creative time
Wow.
in my life. Yeah, exactly. So I did all the business stuff. Right? So banking, entrepreneur, chief development officer at Optimum Logistics. And then when we sold the company, I returned to banking. And at that point with JP Morgan Chase, but as I mentioned, with all that bank consolidation, all the First Chicago and Bank One people are now actually also at JP Morgan Chase, as are my former colleagues from Citibank. And so I had this very nice opportunity to do some M&A work with JP Morgan Chase. And then we decided to return to the Midwest, do law. And how I got into bankruptcy, I have all that banking and finance and economic stuff, right? Which I think immediately resonates with a bankruptcy practice. But I didn't know that at the time. I learned that after doing a judicial clerkship with Judge Farnan in the District of Delaware. And of course, he sees a lot of bankruptcy. You have a lot of bankruptcy exposure in Delaware. And it turned out I had just a natural aptitude for bankruptcy and this style of law, right? Which is also very generalist, right? So you need to have good chops on the transactional side, be able to work your way through complex credit agreements, but also do scrappy litigation. So that suited me really well. So when I started my legal career with Sidley Austin, I in fact started in the bankruptcy practice in time for the financial crisis. And of course, that was perfect timing for me and the practice. And we've just been rolling since then.
When you went back to go to law school, did you go to law school full time, or were you working at the same time?
Yeah, so I used it as a sabbatical. So some people might do a sabbatical and I don't know, go to the beach. For me, we we're facilitating a relocation back to the Midwest. And so I used law school as an opportunity to return home. I am a native of Toledo, Ohio. My family is here. So then I went to law school at the University of Toledo College of Law on a full scholarship, which was important because as a second career law student, I don't know where this is going to head, but I did not want to have $200,000 in student loans, right? Um, the other reality of going to law school is that it's very traditional, and you need to be in a traditional recruiting cycle in order to position, especially for big law firms, right? If you were just going to, open your own law firm, maybe less of a concern. But you needed to catch kind of that traditional schedule and credentialing. And so I opted to do law school full time, take a 3-year sabbatical, pivot, relocation to the Midwest. And that worked. And then, of course, now I'm back.
Wow. So, I guess with law being your second career, now getting into being a professor is your third career.
Yeah, I would say that's right. So we do now have an established pattern of pivots. But they're all, I think, in part related, and they build on each other, right? So the reason I can be a professor now at this time of my life is because of that, lengthy career opportunity. I'm also, a JD MBA advisor. We're looking at developing more, business oriented curriculum with the business school. So it actually kind of weaves together all of those past experiences and, maybe one capstone effort.
I think often careers only make sense in reverse, right?
Mhm.
You know?
Right. Yeah, I think that's right. It's like,
Yeah,
how did I end up here? Oh,
yeah,
because I did these other things.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's really great. So, what led you to become involved with the Commercial Law League of America?
Mm. So I was first exposed to the league via the league's legislative efforts and in particular venue reform. And that was, people connecting in trying to find somebody in Chicago who could help develop exposure and visibility for the venue reform efforts. I also did Hill Days. Through that, I was invited to become a member of the league, and I did. So that gave me an opportunity to grow within the bankruptcy section and experience, what I would describe as the power of the league. Um, Great people, fantastic, education. This legislative hook, I think, is both interesting and differentiating, but perhaps, maybe one of the most, attractive elements is that this is a legacy organization, right? And so it's been around for a very long time. We will soon be doing the 132nd National Convention. So I feel like it's an organization that has been impactful, should continue to be impactful, and I like to be part of that growth.
That's perfect. So, you sort of alluded to the various positions that you've been involved in with the league, but can you just maybe specify those a bit as to which various positions you have held?
Mhm. Great. Yeah. So I worked my way through the bankruptcy section, started as a member, then joined leadership, and that was secretary and chair elect and chair. I'm currently immediate past chair. Through that process, I had also led certain committees. We had a committee on releases, we've done other ad hoc committees over the time period. I've written articles for CLW, right? So that I would say is all within the context of activities with the bankruptcy section. I've also been on the board now for several years, and so within board leadership, that's another area of engagement, as you know, Richard, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So you're dealing with broader issues, league management issues. You also have an eye to the future, in terms of initiatives and that has been also very rewarding, and what I hope pans out is that we move into, president-elect, right? That's the pending nomination then, of course,
Yes.
president of the league.
Yes. Yeah. And that sounds really great. So, um, can you? I know at the moment you are obviously working as a law professor, but you're also maintaining a professional practice as well, right?
Mhm.
So, can you
Yeah, so
just
part-time practice.
yeah, can you speak to the balance of doing those, 2 complementary careers?
Yeah. Yeah, so it turns out that academia is far more time consuming than you and I would ever estimate. So if we actually maintain billable hours, it would be a shocking number of billable hours in academia. And that can be everything from, preparing the classes I teach business associations, which is essentially corporate law, contracts, business bankruptcy, and I will be doing a experiential course on transactional drafting for next year. But then also I have these advisory roles, and you have to meet and mentor with students, and that's a very important part of the job. So that turned out to be really a big investment. In addition, you have scholarship, right? So you're researching and writing, and I'm currently going to very soon circulate a full law review article for publication, and it's on the issue of releases and injunctions post Purdue Pharma, which is still a hot topic in bankruptcy. So that's very time consuming. Now, what that means then, from a part time practice standpoint, is that I do have that delicate balancing act. So, you know, you have continuing client relationships that you need to maintain. And sometimes it's episodic and you can manage it well. Sometimes everything's happening all at once. But nonetheless, I feel like the balance has been achievable. And I've continued in this part-time of counsel role with Saul Ewing for this year.
Okay. You mentioned about Purdue Pharma, and you mentioned previously about venue reform. Are those the current big issues in bankruptcy? Or is there anything other than that going on right now?
Mm. Well, I probably would put Purdue as being, a bigger issue than venue, because you do have in all these mass torts and these large cases, everybody's still testing and finding their way as to how to handle the issues raised in Purdue in their Chapter 11 plans, or even a 363 sales situation. Um, Another place where you see a significant amount of attention is relative to pre-bankruptcy credit restructurings, right? So you'll hear things like liability management exercises, LMEs. There's a good deal of attention around that kind of restructuring prior to a Chapter 11, which could be prejudicial, doesn't seem to uh, cure the defects, if you will. But it does maybe shift around and change rights within the bankruptcy itself, that sometimes people will argue is a flavor of sharp practices. So we're seeing that also in Chapter 11. So I would say where I'm seeing a significant amount of attention is probably in the place where you always see attention in bankruptcy, which is who gets what and how is that accomplished, right? And, that includes, why are releases and injunctions even interesting? Because we are talking about, you know, reorganizing rights and privileges, and therefore distributions, through the restructuring process.
The Commercial Law League and NCBJ, the National Conference of Bankruptcy Judges, have had a long relationship, and I know you've been involved in both of those organizations. Can you speak about the relationship between those organizations and how that manifests itself?
Yeah, so it's remarkable because it is also so old, right? So we're talking about a relationship that is, from the origins of the NCBJ. So, we have a relationship that is, 100 years old. Um, the CLLA's presence at NCBJ is truly distinguishing. So we have a very highly respected luncheon. We give a prestigious award, which is the King Award. Um, we do educational panels that are, usually very innovative, well attended. So, my sense is that from an NCBJ standpoint, the league has been a development partner as well as a co-programmer for the organization. We also have many judges and former judges who are part of the league as well, and they have a very important role. And as I've even been reminded that, we have the Koger Memorial Program, as part of NCBJ, bankruptcy judge who was also president of the league. And that gives us just a lot of richness, in terms of not just our membership, but the quality of our dialogue and how we deal with major issues. So while I was very, say, Chapter 11 focused in my response, we will also, as the league, look at issues that relate to what I would call small business and consumer practice. Examples there would be student loans, where the league has formulated a position. Subchapter 5, I mean, that's pretty standard stuff in the bankruptcy world, to try to extend and make permanent the debt limit on Subchapter 5, so that, we can have more companies throughout the country be able to leverage Subchapter 5. And then we have a proposed revision to Section 523, which is exception to discharge, to address the Supreme Court's decision in Bartonwerfer. So, we will get, and that's part of the richness, right? We will get a lot of different issues that can then mature into a policy position, right? Another area would be around collections and enforcement against attorneys, right? That's another one where it's like, wow, that's not core bankruptcy work, but pretty interesting in terms of how we regulate our collection efforts.
Right. I had an opportunity to go to NCBJ this year, and I was very pleasantly greeted by everybody, and the to hear the esteem in which the league is held by NCBJ was a very positive experience. So yeah, it was really great. You mentioned about some of the other issues, collections, enforcement against attorneys, student loans. One of the things I would guess at that point is that bankruptcy then has some overlap with the creditors' rights attorneys and agencies within the league.
Mhm. No, that's true. There is overlap, and we've talked about there's a continuum, right? So it's not as if creditors' rights and collections is entirely divorced from what we do in bankruptcy, and noting that bankruptcy, we cover both creditor and debtor interests. Arguably, the Barton Warfer fix is a debtor oriented fix on exception to discharge. So it gives us an opportunity to not only collaborate on all of our initiatives. The releases initiative is another one, right? Where, the bankruptcy section maybe has a little bit more of a, I'll call it debtor favorable perspective than what creditors' rights does. But we can still negotiate to compromise. And that, I think, is rich. So you have a spectrum, because here's the other thing: when you're in bankruptcy practice, you're still doing collections. Right, so while you're not doing a traditional contingency-oriented collection style practice, everyone who practices in bankruptcy is likely doing a flavor of collections, especially if you have, creditor side representations.
Right. And I was going to actually touch on that next. I assume that most bankruptcy attorneys do not do contingent collection work. They're paid and they bill hourly for the work they do, right?
That is correct.
So you're you're well known in the league for your depth and breadth of knowledge of bankruptcy laws, as well as your sense of fun. So I wondered whether you could kind of just speak about your approach to being a member of the league.
Yeah. So I try to be, a pretty positive and enthusiastic contributor, right? So if you say, how do we set the tone? This is one way you do it. That's also how you both develop and preserve this accessibility and, as you say, friendliness that we have not only within the organization, but also with other organizations that we interact with. This is also, I think, the way that the league best positions itself, even in terms of legislative initiatives, right? So respect us for our depth, but talk to us because we're friendly and accessible. So I think that that's a key element of our culture. I also find that it's very respectful when you're working through, say it's a board level decision. I mean, the conversation is excellent, right? So we have very good governance. We have excellent support with our management company and our staff. And so I feel like that also makes it a little bit easier for us to do our job because we are just so collaborative.
Yeah, I think one of the strengths of the league is the conferences that we put on, the various regional ones as well as the national one, and maybe you can just elaborate for people listening as to what these conferences are like and what you could expect to get out of attending one of these.
Yeah, this was one of the, say, hidden gems of when I first got involved with the CLLA. I had not been to a CLLA event, right? So I go to the New York region, I go to the Southern region, I do the national convention, and they are outstanding. Some of the best trade conferences I have attended have been CLLA conferences. So one would be the educational opportunities are truly differentiated and really, I think, inspiring. We just did the Southern region, and to get everything from piracy to civil rights, but still do core arbitration agreements, uh, was fantastic, right? And that just makes us, richer and more interesting human beings, right? And I would see similar experiences with the New York region, right? So you might be talking about judges and doing, core bankruptcy work, but then, we'll have an outstanding presentation about technology or war stories and collections, right? And so, I think that that diversity is a lot of fun, and I think that the group is a lot of fun, right? So group dinners, I mean, as you suggest, we really hang together.
Yes. Yeah.
We socialize well together. And, I think that that is also a really nice part of the league. So, I highly encourage doing as many of the events as possible. And I have found the regional conferences, the Hill Day has been good, as well as, of course, the national convention, which is our flagship annual meeting.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I know it's a bit of a truism that the more you put into an organization, the more you get out of it. But, I do think that when people, join the league and then do more than merely join, they get engaged, they get involved in it, that it becomes a big part of both the practice and even the personal lives. So you've touched on this briefly, but what are your hopes for what you want to do next in the league?
Yeah, so I feel like we could do more to leverage our strengths. So, the historical legacy of the organization is probably one of our greatest strengths. So, I feel like that needs perhaps going forward more investment, play it up, really celebrate the gravitas that we bring to the industry. So I feel like that's maybe an opportunity for further investment, delivering value to members, right? So, we are volunteer driven and it's a membership organization. And so there's always a question around, well, what is the value? So, of course, if you're highly engaged, we get value from the organization. If you're not highly engaged, then, obviously it might end up on the cutting room floor. So my sense is that that membership engagement, which we've been doing a very good job with, certainly over the last couple years, can be an area where we continue to build. I know that there is also the practical issue of, well, I need to get referrals. I need to have a business case in order to sustain my investment, right? So I think, doing even more, to encourage that level of membership participation, but two, using the CLLA for business. Some people have been able to do that very, very well. I have given referrals to other folks on the platform. I've received referrals, right? But I'm hyperactive. And so
Your words, not mine.
yeah, right, exactly, exactly. So it's like, no, we need to find a way to get value across the board. So not everyone's going to find that they have the bandwidth to do a significant amount of volunteer work, but they still need to have some kind of value for their business case. So, I think that's an area where, we just as an organization will keep developing.
I think, sometimes people say that you never really appreciate your own country till you're traveling in another one. And I think similarly with an organization like this, in some ways, it wasn't until I went to NCBJ and heard the esteem in which CLLA is held. It was really interesting to see that rather than attending a CLLA event, So I think you're right. I think there's a lot of positives that the league has that hopefully we can leverage for another century of prosperity.
Exactly,
Um,
exactly.
yeah, so that's great. Yeah, I think there's a lot of good in the league, and I'm really happy to hear some of the ideas you have for uh, continuing its development. You touched on the networking and referrals and so on, which is obviously a big part of membership and a big part of conferences for the creditors' rights attorneys and for the agencies who attend. Is it as big a piece for the bankruptcy attorneys?
I would say bankruptcy attorneys, we still have to make our originations and our numbers. So,
Right.
there's still a need for business development for bankruptcy attorneys. I think that part of the attraction for the bankruptcy section has been, for example, legislative engagement.
Right.
Um, but, very important to our practices and how we prosper is in fact business development. So I would say still an important issue. I don't know if we have figured out how to get bankruptcy and collections. I don't know if there's going to be like a natural sort of referral fit between the two.
Yes.
There is clearly a referral fit between attorneys who happen to do collections and the bankruptcy section,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So that works. But otherwise, I'm not sure I've seen, um, you know, an exploration
Mhm.
of how we could do more from that sort of business referral. So, what have been my referrals? Oh, typically within the bankruptcy section.
Yeah, that's what I would expect. The other thing, perhaps I'm wrong on this, but I know with collection files, people might be, coming back from a conference and hoping to get, 10, 15, 20 new collection files. But with bankruptcy files, my perception is that they are larger files. And if you can land a file, that's a good thing.
That is correct. That
Right.
is correct. So, I'll use an example, a $3 million lawsuit, so that's okay, Um, another one, I'd say maybe the economic value and billable time was, somewhere between 50 and 80,000 dollars. That's good. That's a decent representation. It's not going to, solve the numbers problem, right? For your originations for the
Right.
year.
Yeah.
But, it's good enough.
Yeah. It's a nice piece to have as
Mhm,
part of your portfolio or whatever.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, great. Well, I've worked my way through my the questions I had outlined. I see we're just about up to our 30-minute point. So, do you have anything you'd like to finish up with before we conclude for today?
Yeah. Well, this is just another example of how, it's such a joy and pleasure to be in the league. So, both our friendship and then, of course, our opportunity to, talk about the league and how it works. I think those are special things that we do.
Yeah, I think so too. And I'm really been hoping these podcasts can convey to people, especially if they're not already in the league, the positives of what you can have if you choose to join us. So Thank you very much for joining me today, Candice. And we'll sign off now until the next Outstanding Accounts. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.